So awakening is a natural process. It's the understanding, it's not something strange or different, although it can feel very strange for the person. It is really an evolutionary growth that begins to urge and prompt and stir and effervesce inside the person, and that leads them perhaps initially to question. There's a questioning of things that have previously been sort of accepted or unexamined or just really just engaged with in an unexamined sort of way. We now begin to question. It's like, why should I be in this job? Why should I have this particular family arrangement? Why should I be someone who goes to work 9 to 5 or the midnight shift or whatever it is? What am I really here only to create income, or am I here only to do this one limited thing in my life? Is really the purpose of my life? So there's a lot of questioning that happens, and that questioning can be very, very painful. When we question the foundation of our life, it's kind of like an earthquake in a certain sense. All the things that created our stability previous to that are we feel queasy in a certain kind of way, and there can be depression, there can be a sense of disorientation, there can be a sense also of reaching out kind of wildly, grabbing something, or just sort of experimentation across a broad spectrum. And then there's a feeling that we are guided from inside, and that guidance evolves in stages. A person may arrive at something and practice in a certain arena of a certain style for a while, and then they may feel, no, now there's a further unfolding, unfurling, a blossoming that happens that leads them in a further direction, and in that stepwise process, the great tantric masters talk about that, and they say, yes, there's the inner guidance system of this Shakti, which is really informing in series and stages the understanding of the person that leads them first here and then here and here. And the initial context that the person arrives at may not be the final context of practice. It may be a place where certain experiences, certain transformations, certain understandings, certain realizations are consolidated, but that then there's still a feeling of something else, an urgency or a lack of fulfillment or a curiosity or a desire to explore deeper or to discover something else. And it is that something is calling us, something is pulling on us, something is causing us to grow. And as we know, growth can be alarming, it can be difficult, it can be painful in certain ways. Even when you're a little kid, your bones hurt when you grow, and you're like, what is happening to me in this growth? We grow into different stages. The growth from childhood to adolescence to adulthood is mirrored as well, we could say, on a spiritual level. Sometimes people awaken into, we could call it a kind of childhood engagement with spirituality, tell me what to do, etc., and so on, into then a more rebellious phase of spirituality. There's a kind of angry denial or rejection of so many different things, or a kind of sarcasm about it all, and then finally into a more mature setting in which there comes the understanding and says, I am fundamentally responsible for myself. I am here, I have this body, I have this life, and I am called to do something higher with it. It isn't that we are asked to leave everything behind, see. It's not about saying, I'm abandoning everything, I'm giving everything up, and so on. It's more about saying, in the midst of everything that I'm doing already in my life, what can I add? How can I shift? What can I structure in my life that is going to, over time, build a sensation, a place of depth, of great meaningfulness, of fulfillment, of a sense of accomplishment, of mastery, of attainment, and so on, and that all of the different levels of what we call yoga, whether it's in the various limbs of yoga to the highest level of yoga as meditation, as samadhi, as this incredible entrancement into the deep self state that's inside us. There are these various more silent levels that are inside us which we ordinarily do not visit. Meditation is that practice by means of which you begin to explore and journey and go very deep into that silence and open it up for your own inspection. One of the beautiful teachings that I've been talking about recently is this notion of a dawning time, a time in which human beings are waking up planet-wide. And part of the characteristic of that awakening is that, of course, awakening is not the same as enlightenment. Awakening is just an initial realization of a higher purpose or a higher vision or a higher need about life, which then has to be directed, and it has to be supported, and it has to be engaged in a great variety of different ways. And of course, all of the teachings of the many different esoteric traditions are there as various means and methods. The dawning time idea is this notion that we're moving from an age of darkness, an age of ignorance, a topsy-turvy age. One of the terms that gets used in the Sanskrit texts in the Puranas about the Kali Yuga is mishra. Everything is mixed up, everything is confused, what should be up is down, what should be in is out, there is a loss of knowledge, etc., and so on. And then the idea that there is, just like in the morning, there's a time in which the nighttime comes to an end, but the day has not yet begun. And then there is this transition time. It's this just a time of transition, which is the dawning time. The sun has not yet risen over the horizon, but yet there's a glimmering of something new that is different from this nighttime. And the idea that we are actually in that time right now, that people all over the planet are waking up. Now that awakening can have social implications. People get involved in environmental things, in artistic or political movements and so on. But for many people, it is this deep need to go deep inside themselves, to understand their life in a new, more powerful, more vibrant sort of way. And it is at that time of awakening that then the understanding the tradition says is that as that awakening happens, we will be led spontaneously to various directions of knowledge, various teachers, various systems of practice that call our attention and begin to take us on a journey. Eventually, that journey coalesces into a path, and eventually that path becomes very powerfully stabilized in a life practice of some sort. So, for me, in my own vision of what is taking place, it just seemed that I want to contribute to that. I want to contribute to the fact that people are waking up. And, it's like when someone wakes up in the morning, they may be grumpy. They may not be fully rested. They may be disordered. It's like, where am I? What happened yesterday, etc. and so on. It's the same thing. Spiritual awakening can many times actually precipitate a sense of loss or even of depression. The person doesn't know what life is about. And then now, as certain kinds of knowledge come forward, as certain kinds of experiences and practices are brought into life, life begins to come into alignment. There's an engagement of that awakening process into what is called, in the Tantra tradition, sadhana, systematic, coherent practice that then begins to engage. The deeper energies of awakening are engaged, modulated, streamlined, and the person then begins to feel, now I'm growing and evolving in a new way inside myself and also outside of myself. And the pivot is a systematic and intelligent body of practice or sadhana that is then being used, as it were, as a mechanism of transformation. So this idea of awakening is taught in the tantric text. This very great master, Abhinavagupta, says that fundamentally there is one awakening, but that it has different levels or intensities or grades. And so he says that for some people, the awakening is very mild, and it leads them to investigate in certain ways, to look for different things, but that it doesn't really empower or fuel a really profound search. For other people, then there's a kind of a middling level of intensity, and then he says there are certain people that the intensity of that awakening is so compelling, so dramatic, and so profound. And so it really depends in a certain sense what has happened inside the person. And it's also sometimes happens that a person may be awakening in a kind of initial, milder sort of way, and then that can ignite, it can kindle, it can catch fire for the person, and then they surge into wanting to be more profoundly interested in something. So the idea is that the awakening itself, the different degrees of intensity of it, actually are what drive us out to seek out resources and practices and philosophies and different teachers and different systems of practice to investigate them. Nowadays, of course, we have the whole world at our fingertips. A person just sitting at their laptop can investigate all of the esoteric philosophies that have ever existed in humanity just by typing in a variety of different names. And yet, at a certain moment, the awakening itself pulls us. I use this phrase, heart attracts us in a particular direction. We feel that this particular direction is most consonant or congruent with who we are as human beings, and we begin to recognize, we feel like we're coming back to something that was already there, something that feels like home, a place where there is a place where we can invest ourselves in terms of deep practice. And so there are many systems of practice, there are many different traditions, there are many different teachers, and the awakening itself then guides from the inside a person to go this way, to go this way, to go this way. It's a really beautiful and also very mysterious process of our own destiny, of our own evolution, of our own trajectory. And the Shaiva masters speak about it. They say it's very natural, just like a seed. The seed contains the entire tree. The whole tree is there inside the seed. So as the seed sprouts of our awakening, the particular characteristic, the pine tree, or is it an oak tree, or is it the fig tree, the famous great banyan tree of the Upanishads and so on, there will be different things that will grow out of that seed that will show themselves in terms of a person being attracted perhaps initially to asana, or feeling that asana is their entire trajectory, being attracted to bhakti traditions, being attracted to traditions that evolve from Buddhism or the Sufi tradition or many other traditions. And then within my own teaching is just the declaration. For myself, I was very profoundly heart attracted, not in a way that was intellectual or that was pre-thought. It was just, I was driven to investigate this tradition of Kashmir Shaivism and the linkage between what I was reading in the Sanskrit texts and what was happening in my meditation practice after 5 years, after 10 years, after 20 years, after 30 years of meditation, and beginning to see this mirroring effect where I was reading this esoteric Sanskrit and somehow it was speaking to me about what had naturally evolved and grown in my meditation practice. And that was it is a mind-blowing experience to realize this awakening had led me both to a very profound practice and also to an extraordinary esoteric system that had come alive, that I was actually able to understand beyond it being just a mere philosophy into a living transmission of some authentic and profound truth about what life was for me. And that's what I try to convey in my own teaching.